My name is Arthur, and in the sterile confines of a family courtroom, my son-in-law was methodically painting me as a monster, a danger to the very children who are my entire world. But what he didn't know was that the truth I was about to unleash would not only save my great-grandchildren, but would shatter his carefully constructed life forever. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The cheap fluorescent lights of the county family court hummed and flickered overhead, casting long, unsettling shadows across the rows of worn wooden benches. At 80 years old, I never in my wildest dreams imagined I would be in a place like this. A place of broken families and bitter disputes, fighting for the simple, God-given right to see my own great-grandchildren. My hands, gnarled by a lifetime of work and the persistent ache of arthritis, trembled just slightly as I gripped the worn handle of my old leather briefcase. It felt like the only solid thing keeping me anchored to reality in this surreal waking nightmare. Your Honor, with all due respect to his age, a smooth, confident voice began. Arthur Miller poses a significant danger to my children. Mark's words sliced through the stuffy courtroom air like a surgeon's scalpel, cutting straight into my heart. My son-in-law stood tall and impeccably composed in his tailored charcoal suit. His dark hair was perfectly styled, not a single strand out of place. He projected the perfect image of a concerned, grieving father, his voice steady and filled with conviction as he systematically dismantled my character with calculated, cruel precision. I couldn't stifle a small gasp of shock, and the judge's tired eyes flicked toward me for a brief moment before settling back on Mark. Mr. Miller is 80 years old and is becoming increasingly unstable, Mark continued, his voice now dripping with a thick, false concern that made my stomach churn. Last month, he left the gas stove on for hours after making tea. He frequently forgets to take his heart medication. He tells the children these morbid, disturbing stories about their mother that give them terrible nightmares. Each accusation felt like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. My mind raced, trying to untangle the grotesque distortions of reality he was presenting. The time I'd left the stove on low for 15 minutes before catching it. The one time I'd misplaced my blood pressure pills because I was rushing to watch the kids after Mark called in a last-minute panic. The cherished family stories I'd shared about their mother, my daughter Emily, whom they would never have the chance to truly know. Across the room, Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses, his face an unreadable mask as he scribbled notes on a legal pad. He was younger than I'd anticipated, maybe in his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and the weary eyes of a man who had seen too many families tear each other apart. "Mr. Miller, are you represented by counsel today?" the judge asked, his tone surprisingly gentle. "No, Your Honor." My voice came out thin and fragile, a pale imitation of its usual strength. I didn't think I would need a lawyer just to see my own great-grandchildren." A small, almost imperceptible smirk touched Mark's lips before he quickly composed his features back into a mask of solemn worry. His lawyer, an expensive-looking man in a pinstripe suit, leaned in and whispered something in his ear. They had arrived armed for a war, while I had naively shown up expecting a civil conversation. "Your Honor," Mark's lawyer interjected smoothly, his voice resonating with authority. "We have brought documentation of Mr. Miller's increasingly erratic behavior. My client is simply concerned for the children's safety and well-being." He approached the bench and handed a thick manila folder to the bailiff. My stomach twisted into a painful knot as I wondered what sort of documentation they could have possibly fabricated. For years, Mark had kept me at a careful distance from Leo and Sophie, my precious great-grandchildren. Ever since my dear Emily died in that car accident 3 years ago, he had been slowly, methodically pushing me out of their lives. "Mr. Miller, do you wish to respond to these allegations?" Judge Harrison asked. I pulled my shoulders back and straightened my spine, pointedly ignoring the familiar ache in my lower back. Your Honor, everything he's saying is a twisted version of the truth, or an outright lie. I have loved and cared for those children since the day they were born. After we lost Emily, I've been the only connection they have to their mother's side of the family. My voice cracked on my daughter's name, even after 3 long years. The pain of losing her was as raw as an open wound. Mark never liked me offering advice about the children. Objection, Your Honor. Mark's lawyer interrupted sharply. Mr. Miller is making unfounded personal accusations. Sustained. The judge nodded. Mr. Miller, please confine your response to the allegations at hand. I gripped my briefcase tighter, feeling trapped and utterly outmaneuvered. It was in that moment of despair that I saw it. A small folded piece of paper had slipped out of Mark's open briefcase as he'd reached for a pen. It was a prescription slip, and even from across the room I recognized the name of the medication from my 40 years as a pediatric physician's assistant. My blood ran cold. Suddenly, 100 scattered, worrying pieces began to slam into place with horrifying clarity. The children's frequent, bizarre accidents, their mysterious, fleeting illnesses that doctors could never diagnose, Mark's constant dramatic trips to the emergency room with them. Your Honor, I said, my voice suddenly finding a new, hard strength I didn't know I possessed. There is something about Mark that this court needs to know, something that puts those children in very real, very immediate danger. Mark's face went pale, his fingers instinctively clutching his briefcase shut. Mr. Miller, that is a very serious accusation, the judge warned, his eyes narrowing. So is calling me a danger to my own great-grandchildren, I replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. And I believe I can find evidence that will change everything about this case. The courtroom fell into a thick, expectant silence. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, Mark looked genuinely panicked. Given the gravity of these counter-accusations, Judge Harrison said finally, his voice slow and deliberate, I am postponing this hearing for 1 week. Mr. Miller, I strongly advise you to obtain legal representation before we reconvene. As the gavel came down with a sharp crack, I knew the real fight was only just beginning. Mark rushed past me, his handsome face contorted with a barely suppressed rage. You've just made the biggest mistake of your life. Old man, he hissed under his breath. I watched him storm out of the courthouse, my heart pounding against my ribs. For years, I had held my tongue, trying to keep the peace for the sake of the children. But that was over. Leo and Sophie needed to be protected, and the terrible truth was that they needed protection from the very person claiming to be their protector. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the key to unlock the front door of my small, quiet home in the suburbs. The echo of Mark's venomous words, a danger to the children, pursued me like a persistent shadow. I dropped my briefcase onto the entryway table, my legs suddenly feeling too weak to hold my own weight. Sliding down the wall to the floor, I finally let the hot, frustrated tears come. How on earth had it come to this? I dedicated my entire life to caring for others. 40 years as a pediatric PA, raising my sweet Emily on my own after her mother passed away so young, helping Emily raise her own children, and now just trying to be a constant presence for Leo and Sophie. At 80 years old, I was being painted as some kind of senile, dangerous monster. The framed photographs lining the hallway seemed to mock me. Emily's college graduation, her wedding to Mark, the births of their children, Leo and Sophie. Looking back, Mark had always been distant, even cold toward me. But things had deteriorated at an alarming rate after Emily's accident 3 years ago. Without her acting as a loving buffer between us, Mark began to severely limit my time with the children, always armed with a plausible excuse. "They have too much homework," he'd say, or "they're just getting over a nasty cold." But last Christmas, 9-year-old Leo had whispered something that had stolen countless hours of my sleep ever since. "Dad says we can't tell you about the hospital visits anymore, Grandpa." Pushing my aching body up from the floor, I moved stiffly to my small home office and pulled out the worn spiral notebook I'd started keeping that very day. Every strange occurrence, every unexplained bruise or sudden illness was meticulously documented with dates and details. Mark had always been excessively, almost performatively, concerned with the children's health. At first, I had tried to see it as admirable attentiveness, the mark of a devoted single father. But then I began to notice the disturbing patterns. The phone rang, its shrill noise startling me. It was Susan, my oldest friend and a fellow retired nurse. "Arthur, how did it go in court?" Her warm, familiar voice was an instant comfort. "Terribly," I admitted, the dam of my composure breaking as I recounted the entire humiliating hearing. "He's claiming I'm unstable and dangerous, Susan. He's trying to cut me out of their lives for good." "That is the most absurd thing I have ever heard. Those children absolutely adore you." Susan's indignation was a welcome balm to my wounded spirit. "What are you going to do?" I hesitated for a long moment before answering. "I saw something today, Sue, a prescription slip in his briefcase. It was for ipecac syrup." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy and spoke volumes. As medical professionals, we both knew exactly what that meant. Ipecac, once commonly used to induce vomiting in poisoning cases, had been pulled from over-the-counter sales years ago due to its high potential for abuse, particularly by those with certain devastating psychological disorders. "You think he's making those kids sick?" Susan's voice was low, her statement landing not as a question, but as a horrified confirmation. "I've suspected something wasn't right for months now," I confessed, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Leo's recurring stomach bugs that seem to appear out of nowhere and then vanish just as mysteriously. Sophie's strange, unexplained rashes that the hospital doctors can never seem to diagnose. Munchausen by proxy," Susan said quietly, giving a name to the terrifying disorder I had been afraid to even think. "A condition where a caregiver, often a parent, fabricates or induces illness in a dependent to gain attention and sympathy. I need proof, Sue. Hard, undeniable evidence before I make an accusation like that. He's already convinced the world I'm going senile." I glanced down at my trembling hands. Maybe I should just let it go. Walk away. "Arthur Miller." Susan's voice sharpened with the no-nonsense tone she used to use on stubborn interns. "I've known you for 50 years, and you have never once walked away from a child in need. Those are your great-grandchildren. And if you're right about Mark, they need you now more than ever before." After we hung up, I dragged the step stool into my hall closet and pulled a dusty cardboard box down from the top shelf. It was filled with Emily's things, items I couldn't bring myself to part with after the accident. Among them was her old laptop, untouched for 3 years. Mark had never asked for it back. Maybe he had forgotten it even existed. My fingers felt clumsy and slow on the keyboard, but Emily had always used the same simple password for everything: her wedding anniversary. The screen flickered to life, revealing her email inbox, still logged in after all this time. I felt a pang of guilt, like I was intruding on her privacy, but I forcefully reminded myself what was at stake. I typed Mark and hospital into the search bar, then began scrolling through years of mundane correspondence. Most of it was just appointment reminders and school newsletters. But then, one email thread from just weeks before Emily's death caught my eye. They were emails between Emily and a doctor, Evelyn Reed, at Children's Memorial Hospital. "I'm getting concerned about the frequency of Leo's hospital visits," Emily had written. "Every time I question Mark about it, he gets incredibly defensive. Is there any way for me to review his full medical history without Mark needing to know?" Dr. Reed had replied, suggesting they meet in person. I searched frantically, but I could find no follow-up emails. Emily had died in that crash just a few days later. I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Had my daughter suspected something too? Had she started to question her own husband's behavior toward their children? My doorbell chimed, the sound jolting me from my thoughts. I peered through the peephole to see Jessica Wright, Emily's best friend since their college days, standing on my porch with a worried expression on her face. "Susan called me," she explained as I opened the door. "She's worried about you." Jessica had always been like a second daughter to me, checking in on me regularly since we lost Emily. As a sharp, successful attorney specializing in family law, she might be exactly the person I needed right now. "Mark's trying to keep me from seeing the children," I explained, leading her into the kitchen. "He's telling the court I'm dangerous." Jessica's expression immediately darkened. "That's utterly ridiculous. You are the kindest, most caring person I know." "There's more," I said, my hands shaking so much that I sloshed a little coffee as I poured it. "I think Mark might be deliberately making the children sick." Her eyebrows shot up. "That's an incredibly serious accusation, Arthur." "I know. And I know how it sounds coming from the unstable old man." I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. "But look at this." I showed her Emily's emails and my notebook filled with meticulous observations. Jessica read everything in silence, her lawyer's mind visibly processing every disturbing detail. "If this is true," she said finally, her voice low and serious, "then those kids are in very real danger. Will you help me?" I asked, hating the sound of desperation in my own voice, but well past the point of caring about my pride. Jessica reached across the table and squeezed my hand firmly. "Of course I will. First thing tomorrow morning, we're getting our hands on those medical records." As she left a while later with copies of all my documentation, I felt the first small stirring of hope I'd felt all day. But it was quickly tempered by a new, horrifying question that began to form in my mind. If Mark had been making the children sick for attention, and Emily had started to suspect it, could her car accident, the one that had seemed so straightforward, have really been an accident after all? The thought sent a profound chill through my entire body that had nothing to do with the cool evening air. For the very first time, I wondered if I was stepping into something far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. Jessica arrived early the next morning, her business suit already looking a bit rumpled as if she'd been up all night. The determined fire in her eyes, however, told me she had been working. "I called in a few favors," she announced, setting her briefcase on my dining room table. "Dr. Reed agreed to meet with us at her office in an hour." My heart gave a hopeful lurch. "She remembered Emily?" "Not just remembered her," Jessica replied, pulling a folder from her case. "She kept her own private notes from their conversation. She's been concerned about the children for years, but she never had enough concrete evidence to file a formal report." The drive to Children's Memorial Hospital was filled with ghosts of the past. I'd spent decades in hospitals just like this one, trying to heal sick children. The familiar, sharp smell of antiseptic greeted us as we stepped into Dr. Reed's office. Dr. Evelyn Reed was a petite woman with streaks of silver in her dark hair and kind eyes that held the deep weariness of someone who had witnessed too much suffering. She shook my hand warmly. "I remember you from Emily's funeral," she said softly. "I'm so sorry we're meeting again under these circumstances." Thank you for seeing us on such short notice, I replied, sinking gratefully into the chair opposite her desk. Dr. Reed got straight to the point. I've reviewed Leo and Sophie's complete medical histories, she said, placing a file nearly 4 inches thick on the desk between us. The pattern is deeply troubling. She spread several charts across her desk. Leo has been brought to the emergency room 17 times in the past 2 years. Sophie, 14 times. My hand flew to my mouth. I had no idea it was that many. Most of the visits were for vague gastrointestinal symptoms, sudden respiratory distress, or mysterious rashes, she explained. In almost every case, the symptoms resolved quickly once the children were admitted, with no clear medical cause ever being identified. A classic presentation from Munchausen by proxy, Jessica murmured, looking at the charts. I've had my suspicions for a long time, Doctor, Reed continued. But Mark always has a plausible explanation. He is charming, articulate, and he appears to be a deeply concerned, devoted father. The medical staff often sympathizes with him, the handsome, widowed father struggling to raise 2 children on his own. But you didn't believe him, I said, leaning forward. Doctor, Reed hesitated for a moment. There were inconsistencies. Blood tests that showed unusual substances that didn't align with his reported symptoms. The children's conditions improving dramatically the moment Mark would leave their room to get a coffee. Small things that you learn to notice over the years. She slid several photographs across the desk. These are images taken during various hospital visits over the past year. I forced myself to look. There was Leo, his small arms covered in unexplained bruises at identical symmetrical points. There was Sophie, with strange rashes that appeared in perfect geometric patterns that were highly unlikely to occur naturally. Your daughter came to see me just before she passed away, Dr. Reed said quietly. She was starting to piece things together too. My eyes burned with unshed tears. She never told me. She was gathering evidence first. Emily was methodical. She didn't want to make such a terrible accusation without proof. She glanced at a calendar on her desk. We were scheduled to meet the day after her accident. The unspoken implication hung heavy and suffocating in the air. Had Mark found out? Had he? No, I couldn't let my mind go there. Not yet. Dr. Reed. Jessica leaned forward, her voice all business. Would you be willing to testify in court about these findings? I've already prepared my official statement, she replied, handing Jessica a sealed envelope. But you need to be aware that Mark has a lot of supporters at this hospital. He's very involved in several children's charities, always front and center at fundraisers. People see him as a pillar of the community, a devoted single father. Like most abusers, he maintains a perfect public image, I said bitterly. On our way out of her office, I felt a gentle tug on my sleeve. A young nurse with worried eyes pulled me aside. Mr. Miller? I'm Brenda. I was on duty last night when Leo was brought in again. My heart felt like it stopped beating. Leo was here? What happened? Severe vomiting and abdominal pain, she said, her voice low. Mr. Crawford said he ate something bad at school, but she glanced around nervously. I saw him at Leo's bedside with a syringe. When I asked him what he was doing, he said it was just water to help him stay hydrated. But the liquid in the syringe, it wasn't clear. Jessica quickly gave the nurse her card. Would you be willing to give a formal statement about what you saw? Brenda nodded, her expression hesitant but firm. Yes, the children deserve better than this. As we drove back to my house, I stared blankly at the passing landscape, my mind racing a mile a minute. We have to get them away from him immediately, I said, my voice tight with urgency. It's not that simple, Arthur. Jessica cautioned. "The court system moves slowly, and Mark has legal custody. We need irrefutable, rock-solid evidence. The prescription I saw for ipecac. Can we get pharmacy records?" "Already working on it," Jessica assured me. "But we have to be extremely careful. If Mark even suspects we're gathering evidence against him, he might escalate his behavior." The implication chilled me to the bone. To garner even more attention and sympathy, Mark might make the children even sicker. Back at my house, I found the front door was slightly ajar. My heart began to pound in my chest as I pushed it open cautiously. Inside, the place was a mess. Drawers had been pulled out and their contents dumped on the floor. Cushions were overturned. Papers were scattered everywhere. "Someone was looking for something specific," Jessica muttered, surveying the damage. My notebook, the one where I had recorded every one of my observations and suspicions about the children, was gone from my desk. So was Emily's laptop. The message was brutally clear. Mark knew I was onto him. He was destroying evidence and sending me a terrifying warning. Just then my phone rang, Mark's name flashing on the screen. I answered with trembling fingers. "I do hope you've reconsidered your position, Arthur." His voice was like poison disguised as honey. "The hearing is in just 4 days. Mark, please." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Just let me see the children, even just for an hour." "Oh? I'm afraid that's not possible," he replied coldly. "Leo is really quite ill. Another one of those mysterious stomach bugs. The poor thing might need to be hospitalized again." The threat was barely veiled, and my blood ran cold with the realization that he was actively using my great-grandson as a pawn, deliberately making him sick to punish me for daring to challenge him. "If anything happens to those children, I swear I'll—" "Careful, Arthur." He cut me off. "Threats won't look very good in court, especially coming from someone as unstable as you." After he hung up, I turned to Jessica, my voice now steely with resolve. "We're out of time. We have to move, and we have to move now." The next morning dawned with a palpable sense of urgency that managed to push aside my fear. Jessica had insisted on staying overnight on my couch, deeply concerned about leaving me alone after the break-in. "I've contacted a security expert," she announced as I shuffled into the kitchen, a sleepless night etched on my face. "He'll be here in an hour to install some cameras." I nodded gratefully, pouring coffee with hands that still refused to stay steady. "Any word from the hospital about Leo?" "He was discharged late last night. All tests came back normal, despite the severe symptoms he had on arrival." Jessica's mouth tightened into a grim line. Just like every other time. The doorbell rang, and Jessica moved protectively toward it. Through the peephole, I could see a man with cropped gray hair and the confident, steady posture of someone accustomed to being in charge. "Detective James Carter," he introduced himself, flashing a badge. "I understand you had a break in, Mr. Miller." Jessica had called the police last night, of course, but I hadn't expected a detective to respond in person for a simple burglary. "I worked with your daughter, Emily," Detective Carter explained, noticing my confused expression. "We collaborated on several cases involving child welfare. She was a good woman, one of the best." His words warmed a small, cold place in my chest. "You knew Emily well?" "Well enough to find it extremely strange when the investigation into her accident was rushed through so quickly," he said carefully, his dark eyes scanning my reaction. "Single car accident on a clear night. She was an experienced, cautious driver. No mechanical failures were found in the vehicle. Yet somehow she lost control on a curve she'd driven hundreds of times. A chill that had nothing to do with the morning air snaked down my spine. "You think it wasn't an accident?" "I think," he replied deliberately, that your daughter was beginning to ask some very difficult questions about her husband's behavior toward their children. Questions that might have made her a threat to him. The detective declined my offer of coffee, but accepted a seat at my kitchen table. I could never prove anything about Emily's accident, but I've kept an unofficial eye on Mark since then. There have been patterns. The children's frequent, inexplicable hospital visits. Mark's growing involvement with wealthy community figures. His new relationship with Judge Harrison's sister-in-law. Wait, Jessica interrupted. Harrison, the judge on our case? Detective Carter nodded grimly. Mark has been strategically building connections. I believe he knew exactly which judge would likely be assigned to your custody case. Can we request a different judge? I asked, a sliver of hope rising. Not without concrete evidence of bias, Jessica replied, deflating that hope. Which we don't have yet. What we need, Detective Carter said, his voice firm, is to catch him in the act. Undeniable proof of him deliberately causing harm to one of the children. But that puts Leo and Sophie in more danger, I protested, the thought turning my stomach. They're already in danger, Mr. Miller, the detective said gently. The longer this goes on, the more damage he'll do, both physically and psychologically. The doorbell rang again. This time it was Susan, my old friend, looking determined and carrying a large tote bag. I've been thinking, she announced after introductions were made. Mark doesn't really know me. I've only met him a handful of times at family gatherings over the years. What if I volunteer at Leo's school? I blinked at her in surprise. Susan, you're 78, and I make excellent chocolate chip cookies, she finished firmly. Schools are always desperate for volunteers in the library or the cafeteria. No one ever notices old ladies like us, Arthur. We're practically invisible. Detective Carter nodded in approval. That could work. We need eyes and ears in as many places as possible. I have something too, Jessica added, pulling out her phone. My friend, Sarah, is a pharmacist at the drugstore near Mark's house. She confirmed that Mark had a prescription for Ipecac filled just last week. He supposedly told her it was for a science demonstration at Leo's school, which is absolute nonsense, I said immediately. They would never allow a substance that dangerous for a classroom demonstration. The security technician arrived shortly after, and soon my small house was being fitted with discreet cameras. Detective Carter helped position them for the best possible coverage. Mark strikes me as the type who doesn't give up easily, he explained. If he broke in once, he might be desperate enough to try again. As everyone was busy working, my phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. Mr. Miller, this is Brenda from the hospital. Leo's back in the ER. Mark just stepped out for coffee. Room 304. Come quickly if you want to see him. My heart hammered against my ribs as I showed the message to Detective Carter. This could be our chance, he said, his expression serious. I'll drive you, Jessica frowned. It could also be a trap. Either way I'm going, I said firmly, already reaching for my coat. That's my great-grandson in there. The drive to the hospital felt like an eternity. Detective Carter parked in the emergency lot and then turned to me. Stay behind me, he instructed. If Mark comes back, I'll distract him while you talk to Leo. The pediatric ward was a controlled chaos of activity, with nurses moving swiftly between rooms. I spotted Brenda at the nurse's station and managed to catch her eye. She gave a subtle nod toward a room down the hall. 10 minutes, maybe? She murmured as we passed. He usually takes 20 for his coffee, but sometimes he comes back early. Leo looked so terribly small and frail, lying in the enormous hospital bed, his thin arm connected to an IV drip, his normally rosy cheeks pale and listless. My heart clenched painfully at the sight. Grandpa Artie? He whispered, using the nickname he'd given me when he was just a toddler. Hello, my sweet boy, I said, moving quickly to his bedside while Detective Carter positioned himself near the doorway, partially obscured from the hallway. "How are you feeling?" "My tummy hurts," he said, his voice weak. "Dad says I have to stay overnight again." I glanced at the array of monitoring equipment. His vital signs all looked stable, completely inconsistent with a severe illness. "Leo," I asked gently, my voice barely above a whisper, "can you tell me what happens right before you get sick?" He hesitated, his eyes dropping to look at his hands, fiddling with the thin hospital blanket. "Dad says I shouldn't talk about it." "You can tell me anything, Leo," I assured him, my heart breaking for him. "I just want to help you feel better." His voice dropped so low I had to lean in to hear him. Sometimes, Dad gives me special medicine. It's not the kind from the doctor. He says it's our secret medicine that will make me stronger." My blood ran ice cold in my veins. "Does this medicine, does it make your tummy hurt?" He nodded, a single tear tracing a path down his pale cheek. "It tastes really, really bad. And then I throw up a lot. Dad says that means it's working." Detective Carter had edged closer, his phone now held discreetly in his hand, recording our entire conversation. "Leo, when was the last time you had this special medicine?" "This morning," he said, "before school. Dad said I needed an extra dose today because you were trying to take me and Sophie away from him." I struggled to keep my composure, to not let him see the rage and horror I was feeling. "Does Sophie get the special medicine too?" Leo nodded again. "Sometimes. But Dad gives me more, 'cause I'm stronger." A sudden movement in the hallway caught my eye. I could hear Mark's voice at the nurse's station. Detective Carter tensed. "We need to go," he whispered urgently. I squeezed Leo's small hand. "I'll see you very soon, sweetheart. I promise." "Grandpa Artie?" he called out as I turned to leave, his voice trembling. "I miss you. Dad says you don't want to see us anymore." "That is not true," I said fiercely, turning back for a moment. "I love you and Sophie more than anything else in this entire world." We slipped out through a side exit just as Mark rounded the corner toward Leo's room. Through the glass window, I watched him enter, his posture instantly shifting, his expression transforming seamlessly into that of the worried, devoted father. In the car, Detective Carter played back the recording. "This is good," he said, his voice grim. "It's not a confession, but it's very, very good. We need to move fast. The new court date is in 3 days." I stared out the window at the blur of the city going by, but all I could see was Leo's pale, frightened face burned into my memory. 3 days, I thought? Might be 3 days too late. The next 2 days passed in a frantic blur of focused activity. Detective Carter worked tirelessly, gathering years of hospital records and interviewing any medical staff he could find who had treated Leo and Sophie. Jessica, meanwhile, prepared our legal strategy, meticulously building a case so strong that even a potentially biased judge would be unable to ignore it. Susan managed to secure a volunteer position in the library at Leo's elementary school, reporting back that he had been absent ever since our visit to the hospital. I barely ate or slept, haunted by the image of Leo's pale face and the terrifying knowledge that he was still under Mark's control. One day, just one day, until the court hearing. One more day with those precious children at risk. The phone rang, just as the first gray light of dawn was breaking on the morning before our court date. It was Brenda, the nurse from the hospital. "Mr. Miller," her voice was trembling with urgency. "Sophie was admitted last night with severe respiratory distress. The tests showed some unusual compounds in her system that the doctors can't identify." My heart seized in my chest. "Is she okay?" "She's stable, for now." "But Mr. Miller," Brenda lowered her voice to a whisper, "Mark has been alone with her several times since she was admitted, And each time, Sophie's symptoms get significantly worse shortly after he leaves. "I'll be right there," I said, already reaching for my coat. "No, wait," Brenda insisted. "Mark hasn't left the hospital grounds. He's watching her like a hawk, not even stepping out for his usual coffee. It's like he knows we're suspicious of him." The implication sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. If Mark felt cornered, there was no telling what he might be capable of. "There's something else," Brenda continued hesitantly. "I overheard Mark on the phone this morning. He was making arrangements to take the children to his mother's house in Florida after Sophie is discharged. He mentioned leaving tomorrow evening. Tomorrow, after the court hearing. He was planning to flee with the children, regardless of the judge's ruling. I called Jessica immediately. "We have to move. Today. Now." "Arthur," she cautioned, her voice steady, "if we act without a court order, he's planning to flee with the children." I cut her off, my voice raw with panic. "And Sophie's in the hospital again." "He's escalating, Jessica." Her silence on the other end of the line told me she understood the gravity of the situation completely. "I'll try to get an emergency placement order," she said finally. "Meet me at the courthouse in 1 hour." Detective Carter picked me up on the way. "We've matched the substance in Leo's latest blood work to the ipecac that Mark purchased," he informed me as we sped through traffic. "And I've located 3 other pharmacies where he filled similar prescriptions using different names." The morning air was crisp and cool as we hurried up the imposing steps of the courthouse. Jessica was already waiting for us, her expression grave. "Judge Harrison refused to see us without Mark being present. He says all evidence must be presented at tomorrow's scheduled hearing." "That's outrageous," Detective Carter protested, his jaw tight with anger. "These children are in immediate, life-threatening danger." Jessica nodded grimly. "I suspect you're right about his connection to Mark, but there is another option. Judge Isabella Rossi is handling emergency petitions today. We might be able to get our case in front of her instead." We spent the next 3 agonizing hours navigating the labyrinthine bureaucracy of the family court system. Finally, by noon, we had managed to secure a 15-minute hearing with Judge Rossi, just enough time to present our most critical and damning evidence. As we waited in the hallway outside her courtroom, my phone chimed with a text from Brenda. "Mark leaving hospital, taking Sophie against medical advice. Staff trying to stop him, but he has paperwork authorizing discharge." "He knows," I whispered, showing the message to Jessica and Detective Carter. "Somehow, he knows what we're doing." Just then, the heavy courtroom doors swung open. A middle-aged woman with stern, intelligent eyes and silver-streaked hair motioned for us to come inside. "Mr. Miller," Judge Rossi said once we were seated, her voice direct and all business. "I understand you are seeking emergency custody of your great-grandchildren on the grounds of suspected medical child abuse." "Yes, Your Honor," Jessica confirmed, quickly distributing our packets of evidence. "We have substantial documentation indicating that Mark Crawford has been systematically inducing illness in both of his children." The judge reviewed our materials with remarkable speed, her expression growing darker and more disturbed as she progressed through the medical records, the pharmacy documentation, and the transcript of Leo's recorded testimony. "This is deeply, deeply concerning," she said finally, her voice laced with cold anger. "I am granting a temporary emergency placement order, effective immediately. The children are to be removed from Mr. Crawford's custody pending a full investigation." A wave of profound relief washed over me, but it was tragically short-lived. "Your Honor," Detective Carter interjected, "we have just received information that Mr. Crawford is at this moment attempting to leave the hospital with one of the children against direct medical advice. We believe he may be planning to flee the state." Judge Rossi's response was swift and decisive. "I am issuing an immediate protective order. "Detective, you have my full authorization to take those children into protective custody. Now." We rushed from the courthouse, my old legs moving faster than they had in years, and raced toward the hospital. Mark's silver SUV was just pulling out of the parking garage as we arrived, Sophie clearly visible in a car seat in the back. Detective Carter hit his siren, its piercing wail cutting through the air, forcing Mark to slam on his brakes. The confrontation that followed will be seared into my memory for the rest of my days. Mark's face twisted into a mask of pure fury as Detective Carter approached his vehicle with the court order in hand. Through the car window, I could see little Sophie looking fragile and utterly confused, still dressed in her hospital gown. "You can't do this," Mark hissed as I approached the car. "They're my children. They're children who deserve to be safe," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's over, Mark." His eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. "This isn't over, you meddling old fool. Do you really think anyone will believe you over me? I am their father. A father doesn't poison his own children for attention," Detective Carter said firmly, pulling open the car door. "Mr. Crawford, please step out of the vehicle." For a heart-stopping moment, I thought Mark might try to make a run for it, but with hospital security guards now surrounding the car, he had nowhere to go. As he stepped out, the carefully crafted mask of the perfect, grieving father slipped away completely, revealing the cold, calculating, and monstrous man who lay beneath. "You will all regret this," he spat at me, his voice dripping with venom. Sophie's frightened eyes met mine as I opened the back door. "Grandpa Artie, what's happening?" "Everything's going to be all right now, sweetheart," I promised, my voice thick with emotion as I gently helped her out of the car. "We're going to make sure you and Leo are safe." As I held my great-granddaughter's trembling body close, I was overwhelmed by a mixture of triumph and profound sadness. We had stopped Mark today, but the deep wounds he had inflicted on these innocent children would take years to heal. And a chilling thought struck me. Leo was still unaccounted for. "Where is Leo?" I demanded, as an officer handcuffed Mark. "What have you done with him?" His lips curled into a sickening smile that sent a sliver of ice through my veins. "You're too late. He's already with my mother." Detective Carter was immediately on his radio, dispatching officers to check Mark's home and his mother's known addresses. As paramedics arrived to take Sophie back inside the hospital, I climbed into the ambulance beside her, unwilling to let her out of my sight for even a second. "Is Leo okay?" Sophie asked in a small, weak voice, once we were settled in a treatment room. "I hope so, sweetheart," I answered honestly. "We're going to find him." Her thin fingers clutched mine. "Dad gave him more of the special medicine than me. He said it was because he was stronger." The pediatrician who examined Sophie confirmed what we already suspected: traces of ipecac in her system, along with sedatives that should never have been prescribed to a child. As she was treated, I sat vigilantly by her side, watching as the color slowly began to return to her cheeks. Jessica arrived a short time later with news. The police found Mark's mother at her apartment. There was no sign of Leo, but they discovered packed suitcases and plane tickets to Florida for a flight tonight. "He's hidden him somewhere," I said, the knot of fear in my stomach tightening. Detective Carter appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "We've searched Mark's house. No Leo, but we found this." He handed me a notebook, Mark's diary. The entries were chilling in their cold calculation, detailing the symptoms he'd induced in the children, the praise and attention he'd received from doctors and friends, and his growing paranoia that Emily was catching on right before her unfortunate accident. "This is enough to charge him with a lot more than child abuse," Detective Carter said quietly, glancing at Sophie to make sure she was asleep. "We're looking at charges of attempted murder and possibly murder in Emily's case." "But "We still don't know where Leo is," I whispered, desperation clawing at my throat. Sophie's small voice broke through our heavy conversation. "I know where Leo hides." We all turned to her. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" I asked gently. "When Dad gets really, really mad." "Leo hides in the secret place in the garage, behind the Christmas boxes," he showed me once. Detective Carter was already back on his radio, directing his officers back to Mark's house. The next 30 minutes were the longest and most agonizing of my entire life, waiting by the phone while Sophie drifted into an exhausted, medicated sleep. When the call finally came, I nearly collapsed with sheer relief. They had found him, dehydrated, weak, and terrified, but alive. He had indeed, hidden in a small storage crawlspace in the garage, terrified after Mark had given him a double dose of the medicine and told him that I was coming to take him away forever. By that evening, both children were stable, sleeping peacefully in adjacent hospital beds. Social services had already approved my temporary custody, pending the formal hearing. I sat in a chair between them, one wrinkled hand holding each of their small ones, overwhelmed by gratitude and the chilling knowledge of how close we had come to losing them both forever. Jessica appeared with coffee and a weary but genuine smile. "Judge Harrison has recused himself from tomorrow's hearing after learning of Mark's arrest. Judge Rossi will be taking over the case." "Small mercies," I murmured. "Not so small," she corrected gently. "Judge Rossi has already reviewed all of our evidence. Mark is going away for a very, very long time. And as for the children, the court strongly favors placing them with family. There will be formalities, of course, home visits and evaluations. But given the circumstances and your background as a pediatric PA, I am confident you will be granted permanent custody. But at my age, I couldn't help but worry. Age doesn't disqualify love and competence, Arthur," Jessica said firmly. "Besides, the court will see that you were the only one who recognized what was happening and fought like hell to protect them." Detective Carter joined us later, confirming that Mark had confessed to inducing the children's illnesses, but was still maintaining that Emily's death was a tragic accident. The investigation would continue, but for now, the immediate danger had passed. The following morning brought a whirlwind of activity. Social workers interviewed the children in a gentle, age-appropriate manner. Doctors conducted thorough examinations. Court-appointed representatives came to inspect my home to ensure it was a suitable environment for two young children. Throughout it all, I remained steady, drawing on a deep well of strength I hadn't known I possessed. When we finally appeared before Judge Rossi, the courtroom felt like a different world from my first experience. Mark was absent, represented only by a court-appointed public defender who made no objections to any of the proceedings. The evidence against his client was simply insurmountable. "Mr. Miller," Judge Rossi addressed me directly, her voice filled with respect. "The court recognizes the extraordinary measures you took to protect these children. Your courage and persistence undoubtedly saved their lives." She shuffled through the papers before her. "Therefore, I am granting you full legal and physical custody of Joseph and Sophie Crawford, with any and all necessary support services to be provided by the state, given your age and the children's special needs in the wake of their ordeal." The words washed over me like a benediction. They were safe. They were mine. "There is one more matter," the judge continued. "The investigation into Emily Crawford's death has been officially reopened based on new and compelling evidence. Detective Carter will keep you informed as that case progresses." 3 days later, I brought Leo and Sophie home, to my home, which was now their home too. We had transformed my old spare bedroom into a cheerful space with 2 new twin beds, colorful quilts, and a mountain of stuffed animals. Susan had baked a mountain of her famous chocolate chip cookies. Jessica had assembled 2 brand new bicycles for the driveway. Detective Carter had brought by a list of excellent child therapists and promised to check in regularly. That first night, as I tucked them into their new beds, Leo asked the question I had been dreading. "Grandpa Artie, why did Dad make us sick?" I sat on the edge of his bed, choosing my words with the utmost care. "Your dad has a sickness in his mind that made him think very differently than most people. He made some very, very bad choices. But that was not your fault. None of this was ever your fault. Is he going to get better?" Sophie asked from her bed, her voice small. "I don't know, sweetheart. But he's going to be in a place where doctors can try to help him for a long, long time. And you two are going to be right here with me. Safe and loved forever." "Forever?" Leo's voice was small, but filled with a fragile hope. "Forever," I promised, my heart swelling in my chest. "We're a family now." Later that night, long after they had fallen asleep, I stood in the doorway of their room, just watching their peaceful faces in the soft glow of the nightlight. The path ahead of us wouldn't be easy. There would be therapy sessions, court appearances for Mark's trials, and the long, difficult process of healing from years of unimaginable abuse. There would be lingering questions about their mother's death that might never be fully answered. But tonight, in this quiet, peaceful moment, they were safe. The truth I had fought so hard to reveal had indeed changed their futures forever. At 80 years old, I was beginning a new chapter I had never in a million years anticipated, raising 2 young children, navigating the modern world of school schedules and video games, and building a home where trauma could slowly, gently be replaced by trust and love. I was their protector now, their safe harbor, their guardian. And despite all the challenges that lay ahead, I had never been more certain of my purpose in this world. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.